Hello and welcome back to the Fearlessly Different podcast, the podcast focused on encouraging a next generation of fearless students. I'm your host, Nadine Loffer, and on today's episode, we are joined by Ava from Clean Living with Ava. Now, if you're on Instagram at all and you follow a lot of homeschoolers, you probably have seen her reels pop up. And actually, no, it doesn't even matter if you're a homeschooler or not, because what Ava does is she is encouraging other teenagers to pursue clean living, and she's absolutely exploding on Instagram. I love all of her reels, and I've been following her for about, I think, a few years now. But it was a complete honor to have the opportunity to interview her and talk about her homeschooling journey, but also how that really led her to pursue clean living and what that impact has had on social media and on her personal life, and then also some tips on how we as teens can better pursue healthful living and what that looks like. And how much that benefits us, not only just our physical well-being, but also our academics and the way we do our work and our way we do our social life too. So this is a great episode for anyone to listen to, homeschooler or not, but particularly if you're a homeschooler. Ava is really inspirational because she's taking the opportunity that she has as a homeschooler to have more free time and the ability to post content on the internet and really make a difference in her community. So without further ado, let's dive into this episode. Welcome, Ava, to the podcast. I'm so excited to talk with you today for multiple reasons, one of which I've been following you for a while, and you've been such an inspiration content-wise on Instagram because you're growing all the time and you're just doing amazing things and you're so young. So I've loved following your page and how much you're inspiring people to change the way they view food, especially as a teenager, which is just such a powerful platform that you have. And then also that you talk about homeschooling, which I love because so many people who are homeschooled and have Instagram pages, it's usually like this thing they talk about maybe every once in a while, but you have really made an effort to talk about your homeschooling experience and encourage people to pursue homeschooling, which I have absolutely loved. So thank you for being on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for your kind words. I am so happy to be of help of anyone who's interested in clean eating and homeschool. And I totally agree what you were saying about how a lot of people kind of brush homeschooling to the side if they're homeschooled and a content creator, because I feel like it's kind of something that a lot of people are embarrassed about, but they really shouldn't be. It should be talked about and normalized.
Yeah, I agree with that. It is kind of pushed to the side and they mention it maybe every once in a while, but it is something that is so cool. And what has given you the confidence to kind of talk about it more?
Yeah, I have not really ever cared about what people thought about me or my situation or anything. So I was never scared to start talking about homeschooling. But I just think it lately, especially after COVID, it has become such a more well-known thing. Yeah, but I just really wanted people to start realizing that homeschool is a real form of school, if not harder than a lot of public schools around here. I'm not saying all public schools, but my public school is definitely not as hard as my homeschool program is, which is kind of gets frustrating to me because a lot of people see homeschool as this fake form of school, or my mom's just teaching me random things that she found on the internet. And that's couldn't be further from the truth. So I just kind of wanted to start normalizing homeschool and bringing awareness to the fact that it is a real form of school.
Yeah, that has been one of my main things too, as well as how can we make homeschooling be seen as a real valid alternative for education, but a really cool alternative and a very powerful one. So, and the one thing I found was that the way we fight back against the stereotypes and the myths is by sharing our stories, which is exactly what you're doing. And that's kind of a very powerful thing because it's very hard to argue against someone's real experience. And I hope the more information we get out there and the more experiences we share, the more normalized homeschooling will be.
Yes, you're so right.
So let's jump into your homeschooling experience since we're talking about homeschooling. Yes. How did you first get started homeschooling? You mentioned you were at your public school. Was it last year that you were at public school?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I have kind of a interesting homeschool story. So from kindergarten until 6th grade, I was in public school. And we had to like quarantine for COVID
Mhm.
when I was in my 6th grade year of school. And after that year, so I was going to be going to 7th grade, my school, like, it was, like, kinda weird. It was doing that, like, hybrid program where kids would
Yeah.
be in some days of the week wearing masks, and other days they'd be, like, completely remote on the computer for, like, 8 hours a day. So, I was, like, having issues wearing the mask, like, it would give me migraines and everything,
Mm.
and I didn't really wanna be sitting, like, in a mask all day, and I definitely didn't wanna be sitting on my computer for, like, 6 hours just, like, on Zoom.
Yeah.
So, I tried it, I just didn't really like it.
Mhm.
But my mom was like my parents decided that they were gonna homeschool me and my siblings. So, we homeschooled that year. We did, like, a program, it's called The Good and the Beautiful, and we really liked it. It was, like, a book like, textbooks and everything.
Mhm.
So I homeschooled that year, but I don't know, after that year, I was like, I loved this so much, like, it was a great year, but I think I'm gonna go back to school because things were, like, starting to get more normal again. So I went back for 8th grade, had a good year, went back for 9th grade, which is high school, and I really did not like my high school. It's
Mm.
so run down. They're actually doing construction on it now. They're building a whole new school because it is so bad. It's from, like, the '50s, I think,
Wow.
and it had mold. It was, like, rotting, falling apart, and I just didn't really like the education I was getting. I was
Mhm.
in all honors classes. I wasn't feeling challenged at all. I was never getting homework, and just a lot of the things I was seeing around me was very suspicious, like, just, like, I would walk into the bathroom and people were doing crazy things that I just, like, didn't really wanna be a part of or even near.
Mhm.
So, after that year, and even during the summer, I completely, like, thought, like, I was going to go back to school for 10th grade. But then I went on, like, a pilgrimage kinda thing with my church to Spain and Portugal
Mm.
at the end of July and early August. And on this trip, I, like, felt a huge calling to homeschool, and it was something, like, I hadn't really thought about at all. Like, I knew I wasn't happy with my school system, but I never really saw myself going back to homeschool. So this was, like, super surprising, and when I got back, then I was going back to school on, like, September 5th or something. So it was super last minute, and I hadn't given it any thought before, but when I brought this to my parents, they were like, "Yeah, like, we'll definitely think about it, and, like, we'd be okay with that. It's, like, really up to you, and we have to find a program that works for you." So we did a ton of research in such a short amount of time, and I gave it so much thought.
Mhm.
Like, I was so close to going back to school. And even, like, when the public school, like, it was the first day of school, I still hadn't found a homeschool program yet. I just knew I, like, was not going to school. I wanted to homeschool. I just didn't know what I was gonna do yet.
Yeah.
But then I found Whitmore Online School shortly after, and I started with them, and I absolutely loved my program. It was awesome, like, I could do honors classes, and I just really had a great experience, and I am so happy that I homeschooled, and I plan to homeschool for the rest of my high school experience.
Wow. I love your homeschooling story. It's very unique because it was mostly you that, well, pretty much all you that instigated the whole I want to homeschool, and your parents came alongside of you to help you. But that's very rare. A lot of times it is the parents who start with the decision to homeschool, and then that, we just all follow them. But I love that it was a calling that you felt like the Lord placed on your heart, and you were brave enough to follow it, which I love so much about that. I had a quick question about the school that you use. What is it called again?
It's called Whitmore Online
Winmore.
School.
Okay. So my question would be for anyone who had experienced the Zoom online COVID public school experience, what does that look like in comparison to like an online homeschooling program? Because I've noticed they're very different, but a lot of people assume they're kind of the same thing. So what
Mhm.
has been the compare and contrast there?
Yeah, so I totally get what you're saying because I feel like when you hear online school, everyone is just like has PTSD to their Zoom
Yeah.
days on like during COVID. But for my school, so my sister did a different program. So I'm the oldest of six, and me and then the second child, we're
Hmm.
the ones who homeschooled this year. We did two different programs. She did Liberty University, which is like
Mm-hmm.
pretty popular, and I
Yeah.
did Whitmore School Online. So how my program worked was it was 100% self-paced. And I still had to do like every single class. So like math, science, English, history, Spanish, and like I had to do fitness and like health. I had to do all the things,
Mm-hmm.
but they only give you 3 courses at a time. So, because they don't want people to get overwhelmed because it is a pretty challenging program.
Mm-hmm.
So, I had 3 courses at a time. You can pick like which courses you want to start with. And for each course, you have a different teacher. So, you can submit your lessons. I did my work 5 days a week, like a normal school day. So it took me about, I would say, 30 minutes to 2 hours, like depending on the class, like for each course. So it was probably around like, it took me about 3 or 4 hours a day, depending on the courses I had. And so you submit your work to your teacher, they get back to you, and it's a revision, like it's a mastery based program. So you have to get at least an 80 on an assignment to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not happy with the 80, then you can revise it until you get to like a 90 or 100, whatever you want. But they really want to make sure that you like 100% know and are confident in the lesson, which I absolutely loved because I felt like a lot in public school like I wouldn't understand, say, a math lesson, but it's not like the teacher can pause and make sure I understood it
Yeah.
before they moved on with the whole class because that's just not how it works. It couldn't work in public school. So I really liked that. And my teacher would give me a bunch of feedback. And then once I finished like the whole entire course, they would add a new course to my roster until I just finished for the summer, which
Mm-hmm.
was I really liked.
I love that mission, the mastery, like the vision of not, I guess it's
Mhm.
not a mission, but um that idea of mastery before you move on. I love that in homeschooling. I mean, pretty much no matter what program you use, you can usually do that, have that mindset. But online are very unique because usually, at least my experience with them, I have had like to submit something every week and move on, kind of like a regular pace of a normal class you would have at public school. So I like the
Yeah.
self-paced idea because that does allow you to lean in more to the mastery idea where you don't have to move on until you 100% know. And knowing is something deeper than just like acing a test. You know, you can totally memorize things and ace a test, but actually understanding and mastering a subject takes a little bit more time, which I love when programs honor that and every student is different. What did your friends from public school think whenever you decided to become a homeschooler?
Yeah, so I would say I I didn't really stay as close with a bunch of my
Mhm.
friends as I like would have liked, but I like they weren't really like completely strong friendships to begin with. Like some of my friends I'm still like I still talk to all the time, I still see all the time, but also lost a bunch of friendships
Mm,
and it's not that I lost them, it's just they're not as strong as they used to be, which was definitely like partly on my part. I definitely could have been better about like organizing things and like hanging out with people, but friends are never really my top priority, if that makes sense. Like, I absolutely love my friends, but I just value family time so
mm,
much. And I just really like love being home and spending time with my family. So it's not really like on the top of my priority list, but I think it is super important to have friends and to hang out with them. But I also think that if you're the one who leaves, like if I was like I'm the one who homeschooled, it should be my responsibility to make the plans.
mm.
And I don't know, I wasn't very good at doing that.
You know, I like what you said that. And did you realize that early on in homeschooling, or is that something you figured out like as the year went on that it was your responsibility kind of to do that?
Well, so my mom had always said that. She was like, "You're gonna have to like make all the plans." So I was very aware of that fact.
Yeah, which is good. It's so important because I honestly didn't think about that until someone told me. Like, it's
Hmm.
actually your responsibility. And I think in your case, it was a little easier to notice because you were the one that instigated the homeschooling switch. But a lot of times, whenever you're homeschooled for a very long time, up through high school, we don't really have that perspective when it comes to friendships and pursuing friendships. So I see a lot of homeschoolers kind of get stuck because they don't
Mm-hmm.
really take that responsibility. And it's not something you're going to be great at the beginning. I find that making plans with people is not necessarily my favorite thing to do in the world, but
Yeah,
I always end up having fun when I do it. Um,
I couldn't agree more.
mhm. So I think it's such an important thing. And it's also, I don't know if what you think about this, but I think it's an important skill to have, especially as we go into adulthood, because it is going to become solely our responsibility to manage our social lives as adults.
Yeah, I totally agree. Especially when like it's not like you're at school every day, hanging out with your friends every day. You do have to like make the effort
Mm-hmm.
to
Yeah.
hang out with people because you're not seeing them as much as you used to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what have been some of your biggest blessings you've experienced this year of homeschooling?
Yeah, so I would say a huge one is like being able to spend time with my family. I so I'm the oldest and I never really like I obviously do get like one-on-one time with my mom,
Mm-hmm.
but I like don't get as much as like I would like to because there are just so many kids and like I wouldn't trade that for anything, but it's just like the reality.
Mm-hmm.
So I loved like having like every day, like when my siblings went to school, it would just be me, my mom, my sister, and my little brother. So it was like so different because it was never us like alone with my mom,
Mm-hmm.
which like I really liked. And I would say another huge thing is I definitely wouldn't have started my Instagram account if it
Mm-hmm.
weren't for me homeschooling. Like I A wouldn't have had the time and I don't think I would have had the confidence because I would still be seeing all my friends every single day and all the people from school. I would have to like face them every day and then go home, go on my Instagram stories in my bathrobe and then go back to school the next day and
Yeah.
hear my voice playing on their phones. Like they all follow me.
Mm-hmm.
I would see it. I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't.
Yeah. You know what? That's actually really funny because the other day, and this is totally off topic, but I was out somewhere and someone had asked me about my podcast and I brought them a business card of mine. And they're like,
Yeah.
"Oh, let me follow you right now." So they go on their phone and they look my podcast up and then they start blasting my latest episode. And there's
Mhm.
like a group of people around. And I am so, it's like the worst feeling. I I sit in my bedroom and I edit my voice, but I hate doing it. And then I'm like, I can't listen to that again whenever I release it. So I totally sympathize.
People at my work, like I have a job,
Mm-hmm.
and I was hoping people in my work would not find out about my Instagram, and they're
Mm-hmm.
finding out. And every time like someone mentions it to me, I'm so caught off guard. I
Mm-hmm.
like literally die inside.
Yeah, I wish I was more confident in it because then I could be like, oh yeah, you should totally listen and whatever. But most of the time I'm like, please don't ask me about it because I don't want you to look it up.
Yeah, same.
Which
I
is not,
freeze.
it's not great marketing. but but it's
Mhm.
like, it's something I have to get over about myself. But that's really fun.
Yes.
And you know what? So you mentioned work. Has that been something you've been able to do more as a homeschooler as well?
Yeah, so I can actually like work a day shift, which my managers are very appreciative of
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
because like I don't have to go to school. So I work 2 days a week, 9 to 3. Actually, it used to be 9 to 3 during my homeschool year, but it's been like 8 to 3 or 7 to 3
Mm-hmm.
lately. So I only work 2 days a week because I tried working three and it was just too much with all my school,
Yeah.
especially if I'm working like all day. It's basically a full school day of work. So I find that working 2 days a week works really well, and I kind of did my schoolwork around that. But school is
Yeah.
obviously my top priority right now.
And how has that working experience been? Do you feel like it benefits you? Learning different skills?
Yeah, totally. And I work in like a little market, like grocery store. So I like love all the vegetables and the produce,
Yeah.
all of that stuff. And I think it's just great like talking to people and like getting out, talking to so many different people because I'm a cashier, so I see so many people every
Hmm.
day.
Yeah.
And I actually have something to share. So many people say like, "Oh my gosh, like are you in college?" And I'm like, "No, I'm homeschooled."
Hmm.
And they're like, "I was wondering why you were so good at talking to me." And like I was wondering why you were keeping such good eye contact. So, homeschoolers, listen up.
Yeah, I think I remember getting a few comments like that. Oh, you must be like older than you look, or and I'm like, no, actually, I'm homeschooled. And the same comments like, oh, you actually like look me in the eye. It's such a
Yes.
weird thing to get because you're always thinking people think you're more socially awkward, and then you kind of it's
Yep.
just it's an anomaly. Honestly, I'm so confused by it. Um, every time it happens to
Hmm.
me, I'm like, "Ugh, aren't we supposed to be the weird ones? Like now we're not anymore.
I
It's
know.
but yet we still are. I don't know. It's and no matter what we do,
Hmm.
it just seems like it's almost impossible to overcome that stereotype. But
It's a tough situation.
yeah, it's interesting. But one thing
Yes.
I love about your talking about being out in meeting different people and everything is well, there's actually two things. Just being out in the community during a regular school day is something that majority of teenagers don't do, which I think is such a valuable like that experience talking with other people, that experience working um, is something that we're not getting because we're in school for 8 hours every day, at least not in the way that you're getting it. So I think that has such a valuable place in this like new way of or in this different way of doing education. And then also I've gotten this a lot. I don't know if you've ever gotten it. Like homeschooling must be an echo chamber. You must not ever talk with people who have different viewpoints, or you must never meet other people besides the people in your circle and your family. That's not really true, especially when you do
No.
things like that.
And I feel like being in a classroom all day, like that is not a real world situation. Like
Exactly.
that is
Yeah.
not, once you get out of school, it's like going to be a culture shock. Like it's not, that's not how the world works. Like you're supposed to be out engaging with other people, getting outside. You're not supposed to be sitting in a classroom every day under fluorescent lights,
Yep.
seeing the same people every single day. Like that's just not how the world works. And I think like homeschool people are very privileged to have the chance to go out and see all these real world situations, like getting a job,
Hmm.
engaging with adults. I think it's super valuable.
Oh, there was another thing that you mentioned when we were talking about friendships, your time with your family and how valuable that is to you. I've heard this question also surface when talking about homeschooling. Worried about being around your family all day and like getting super annoyed and not having fun or whatever it may be. That just has
Mhm.
a negative connotation to a lot of teenagers. And so I'd love to hear your perspective on that. Why do you love being with your family? And have that ever been challenging for you? Or do you just, do you love it and it overcomes all that challenges? I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, so I have a lot of like little siblings. They're
Hmm.
super wild and yelling all the time, which that I don't love.
Yeah, yeah.
But I do love just like I don't know, I love like just being there, like being in the kitchen and like being surrounded by the chaos. And I think it also helps that like three of my siblings go to school every day.
Hmm.
So like that's like I have like that time like to recoup and get my social battery back up before they come home. And
Hmm.
I just like but I never get sick of being around like my parents or like my little siblings because I don't know, it's just like they're my family. I'm so used to being around them and I love being around them.
Hmm.
And I also am not like the kind of person who like likes to be in their room all the time. I like to be downstairs or else I get like FOMO about what I'm missing out on.
I love that. There's something so special about growing that family bond. And have you seen it grow over this past year of homeschooling? Just you're closest with your parents or anything like that?
Yeah, I actually now that you say that, I definitely think so. Especially because like I have that alone time with my mom.
Hmm.
I think our like relationship has definitely like strengthened.
Yeah, it's whenever I ask people their favorite part about homeschooling, it usually is family closeness and being able to bond with their parents and their siblings more. That's been like the main thing. And you know what? On another topic of the school being kind of unnatural in a social setting, another thing is a lot of times with siblings, you're never really with them. Like maybe you see them in the morning and the evening, but that's pretty much all that you get with them. And one of my favorite parts about homeschooling has been getting to know my sister. So I think had we been in a traditional school setting, I would have probably never had the relationship I have with her that I have now. How do you think homeschooling has shaped your view of education?
So I think like it's definitely shown me that education is not sitting in a classroom for 6 hours a day.
Mm.
Like that's not like that's a form of education, but that's not the definition of education. Education is like learning and building like it's building like your intelligence and
Mm-hmm.
shaping
Yeah.
like what you think. And I definitely think that like if a parent is looking for a completely like unbiased form of education, they should strongly consider homeschooling because like it allows children and teenagers to think for themselves like without having ideas and all these like ideologies pushed on them and like kind of force fed to them. It kind of gives you a chance to like let the child or a teenager like think for themselves and shape their own opinions without having them shaped by other students or teachers or the curriculum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I when you said the education wasn't like sitting in a classroom for 6 days, that's the definition of a school. Like I
Yes.
always thought education and school were the same thing. They're not. I think it was
Mm-mm.
Mark Twain. I think it was Mark Twain that said I'd never let my schooling get in the way of my education. Yeah, it's a new idea for me. Like education is a different thing. School is just a way we do education.
Mm-hmm.
And it's different. There's different ways of doing that, which is a brand new idea to me also when we started homeschooling, is that there's not just one path to follow. There's so many, and that can be based on, your students' needs or the pace at which they want to learn. There's so many things that factor into it, and it's a very exciting opportunity for us, especially as high schoolers, to like make those decisions for ourselves. And
Mm-hmm.
you were talking about thinking, which is a really powerful thing. I heard a lot of people say this about homeschooling, or just the point of education should be teaching you how to think, not necessarily what to think. So you can have the right tools to think well. So when you're confronted with new ideas, and even, in your situation, when you're so passionate about clean living, healthy eating, like that's challenging something that's normal in our country is really not to think about that. And you've been able to challenge that, and challenge other people to change the way they think,
Mm-hmm.
which is so powerful. One thing about an unbiased point of view, I think totally understand what you're saying about, you know, it opens the door for teenagers to really understand themselves without having peer pressure all the time. And it teaches us to think on our own too. But I think it's really hard to have an unbiased education. I think there's always a truth. I think, especially as Christians, which I believe you're a Christian as well.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
Catholic.
Yes. So we have this truth that we outline our whole life around, which is the Bible, and that is the way we view the world is through that lens. And so I don't think it's sort of an unbiased necessarily, like that's the goal, but just to have a truth based education, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of indoctrination happening in the schools, which I think is what you're getting at.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes, I
So
totally agree.
that been something you've noticed about homeschooling, is it's giving more time to like be in the word, and I don't know if that's something that you have seen
Yeah,
noticed.
definitely because I don't know, I think a lot of like our society, they don't want people to like be religious and
Yeah.
believe in these things. And a lot of people these days aren't religious. Like, and you can just see it by looking at the school. They don't have anything to like believe in and like look towards and I don't know, like
Yeah.
communicate with and believe in. And they just like seem so lost and you can really see it. And I think just being surrounded by that, like it slowly wears away at your own beliefs. And I think it's great, like being homeschooled, you don't have to be surrounded by that.
Yes.
Like it, like once again, it gives you permission to think for yourselves
Mhm.
and yeah, to absorb what you want to absorb.
You know what, this I feel like this goes really well into talking about your Instagram page, which you touched upon was started whenever you started homeschooling. So what's the story behind it?
When I first started homeschooling, actually, after COVID, so I was only in 7th grade, I started to have really
Mm,
bad gut issues and digestive issues. I was like constantly in so much pain. My stomach always hurt. I would be up multiple times a night, just like crying because my stomach hurt so bad. I was so nauseous. I always had migraines. And I like this was like such a shock. I hadn't changed my diet at all. I was like just eating the standard American diet like I always had,
mm-hmm.
but suddenly like my body was rejecting all of it. And I did like many tests and lab work and I saw multiple doctors and I was told that I had IBS and I would never be able to eat gluten and dairy again. Even eggs I could
Wow.
not have for a little bit. So I was like super shocked because gluten made up a huge part of my diet. Like it was so comforting for me, especially when I felt so sick all the time. So I like started my gluten and dairy free diet and it was so hard at first,
Mm-hmm.
but I started to feel so much better and I was no longer waking up every night in severe pain, but like I would still get frequent stomach issues and like I went to more doctors and again they told me like it was just IBS and I would have like these flare-ups from time to time. And like I believed them and kind of learned to deal with it as best as I could. But being on my like gluten and dairy free diet for a while, I started to see because like when you have allergies, you have to check all of the ingredients. Like you have to look
Yeah.
at every single ingredient label just like to be so careful. And looking at these ingredient labels,
Mm-hmm.
I saw like a lot of these options that I was eating were like coincidentally healthier because they were like gluten and dairy free. They didn't have like all these like
Mm-hmm.
inflammatory ingredients in them. So I started to like look at ingredients and like look more into the products and like the brands and all their missions. And I started to hear a lot about holistic healing and gut health. And it was like around this time that I like started eating healthier and moving to like a more whole foods diet, like filled with protein, healthy fats, fiber, that I really started to see like my symptoms go away. Like they weren't consistent the healthier I ate. And little by little, I started to feel so much better. And I started doing like tons of research on how the gut microbiome becomes damaged, like how to heal it, holistic living, all of that stuff that I talk about it on my page.
Mm-hmm.
And in general, I found so many things that like the doctors never mentioned to me before.
Mm-hmm.
I heard about candida overgrowth, leaky gut, SIBO, and other gut issues that so many people have but don't know it. So like, although I didn't completely understand what was wrong with me, I knew that, like, my gut microbiome was off, and for that reason, I was having these crazy symptoms and, like, developed these food intolerances.
Mm-hmm.
So, I started, like, making much healthier choices that would positively impact my gut, and I cut things out of my life that would damage it. So little by little, like my symptoms completely resolved. I
Wow.
started to feel like so good and like better than I ever felt in my life. I had so much energy and just felt like amazing. So I felt super inspired to start my account because Instagram had helped me a lot, like in learning and researching all of this. Because it kind of like I would see a video and it prompted me to start like thinking about a subject and doing research on it. So I was like, I want to do this too. Like, I want to show people, specifically teenagers,
Mm-hmm.
that they have all the tools they need to heal and like feel good. So that's kind of why I started my account. I started it in October of 2023. So that past October, it was when I was homeschooling. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's how I started my account.
And first of all, you've been like crushing Instagram, which I just love. You're up to 15,000? Is it 15,000 subscribers?
I hit 15,000 yesterday. Yeah.
That is congratulations. That is
Thank
incredible.
you.
Um, so you're doing amazing in that. And I love the story. It is just I know every time I see a teen like see a niche that needs filled and then do the research and fill it, I feel like it's a homeschool mindset because it's really taking something and making it for yourself. So I love
Yeah.
that. And then you were so, you had such a life change experience that you wanted to share it and help others. And that's such a good part about social media, I feel like, that we don't talk about very much, is that it can be used in that way so positively to impact people. It can
Yeah.
also be used negatively, but there is that really cool way of reaching people that you've been doing.
hmm Yeah, I totally agree because I feel like obviously like there's so many negative things that come from
Yeah.
social media.
Yeah.
Like the comments, the videos, like there's definitely a dark side, but a lot of people like fixate on that and don't focus on like the good things that could come from it. Like the relationships you build and like inspiring others is
hmm
super important and impactful.
So we're going to talk about the response to your page in a minute, but I also want to talk about, you mentioned being a crunchy teen a lot in your videos, and I
Oh yeah.
never heard that term used before. So, and I'm really new to all of this. Like my dad's been into gut biome for maybe a few months and he's been talking about it a lot. He just got us a book and he's like, "You need to read this." So, I'm like starting to get into
Oh.
it. But what does it mean to be a crunchy teen?
Yeah, I get asked this all the time, and it's
Yeah.
like one of my most common comments,
hmm
but I never really know how to answer it because it like kind of looks different for everyone.
Okay.
But like to me, I see it as like a teenager who lives like holistically and outside the norm,
hmm
or like kind of just someone who prioritizes their health and like does it in a way that is kind of opposite of the rest. Like it's not like a lot of like it's kind of going away from like what most people are doing. And I see it like, have you ever heard of a crunchy mom?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so it's like that, but like I just call myself a crunchy teen
Crunchy
because
teen.
I'm not a mom.
No, it's kind of pursuing that alternate, like actually learning about the food you're eating, which I love. You talk about that. You actually were reading the ingredients and we're like, oh,
hmm
I don't know if all that stuff I can't pronounce is actually good
Yeah.
for me.
Oh, red 40? What's this doing in
Yeah.
my food?
One thing that I've kind of been overwhelmed when I kind of start getting into this whole idea of holistic living and challenging the food that we normally eat and switching um, to become to choose more healthier options. There we go. I've been kind of overwhelmed because there's so many different things that could potentially be changed. I mean, just food, but then you also sometimes talk about like your shampoo that you use or the toothpaste you use and all those things. So, how should we approach it without getting overwhelmed, especially as teens?
Yeah, I totally see like I feel like it is so overwhelming because there's so much information out there, but I recommend just like going back to the basics. That's I just started a podcast and
Mm-hmm.
I named it Becoming Basic because I just think it's kind of like the simplest way to approach this lifestyle without getting overwhelmed. Like just going back to the basics, like eating real foods, like single ingredient foods that will nourish your body instead of eating like all these processed snacks that has become so normalized in our country. Or doing things like making foods from scratch instead of like door dashing all your food. Like just doing things that our ancestors used to do and things that we were made to do. Like bringing up like the topic of religion again. Like God gave us all of these amazing foods to like nourish our bodies and completely thrive. And our country is completely like avoiding that fact. Like
Mm-hmm.
we have food grown here like that comes straight from the ground that we could be using, but instead we make product like we make ingredients in a lab and put them in our foods, like literally poisoning people. So I recommend just like for starters to add good things into your diet,
Mm-hmm.
like lots of fruits, vegetables, like animal fats, animal protein into your diet because soon like you'll start to feel so good and like subconsciously gravitate towards these things.
Mm-hmm.
And like the rest will come, like things like your shampoo and conditioner and like your toothpaste. That will all come with time.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a like I don't know, letting it like work its way. Like don't freak out and throw everything in your house out. Just take it slow.
It's not very economical either at this point.
No.
Yeah,
No.
but I would love for you to speak directly to teens because one thing I um, struggle with sometimes is just choosing the easier option versus actually like actively wanting to make my own lunch without just eating processed things. And that
Mm-hmm.
often can be the harder choice because it's not as convenient. So, how have you found that even though sometimes it might be a little bit more inconvenient to make something on your own, besides just getting a process or door dashing, what have been the benefits for you that have outweighed that, if you know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
I totally see what you're saying because I feel like, yeah, like fast food and frozen food, like that has become so normalized because
Hmm.
it's so convenient and it's so easy. But if you think about it, like things like I work on some days and
Yeah.
I still make it my priority to make my breakfast. Like I'll make eggs. They're so quick to make.
Hmm.
Or like some people like will make some ground beef on the stove. Like it's not that hard if you think
Yeah.
about it. Like it's really just like fitting it into your life, like making it a priority because like you do feel so much better. You have so much more energy. Your stomach feels so much better. Your
Mhm.
skin looks way better. It's just like fitting it in there and doing it the first few times before like making it a habit. That's
Yeah.
the hard part. But even like I like to meal plan a lot, like in meal prep, and that makes it so much easier. Like making a batch of quinoa for the week, prepping
Mm.
like some smoothies that I can make in my like Ninja Creamy blender or whatever. Like or even like they do make healthier frozen foods like Amy Lou. They have like these chicken meatballs they're called. Like the brand is Amy Lou and they're so
Mhm.
good. And Kevin's is a brand that has like frozen food. Capello's, like there are so many like frozen foods that are made with better choice ingredients.
Mhm.
And you could even like freeze things yourself to like heat up
Yeah.
in the oven one day.
So, if for any of you guys who are interested in learning more about this, go follow Ava because you're constantly posting new things that you find that you love and that are great alternatives. I love watching your videos and everything. So it's a
Thank
great
you.
way to like stay up to date on all these new brands and everything because there's quite a few of them. And
Yeah, it's becoming so popular.
mhm.
Like just because I feel like more people are becoming aware about the
Yeah.
ingredients and everything.
So I was wondering, and this is going to be a shout out to Moana Adams' podcast, Making Waves, but you were just on her podcast and you were talking about this. And I remember something I loved what you talked about how you have found homeschooling is just, it provides you that opportunity to make the food in a way that, or make a healthy breakfast for yourself and lunch, way that public school really didn't offer you that option. So I'd love to say, like, how does homeschooling fit into that, like, holistic lifestyle?
Yeah. So, first of all, you're not surrounded by like the mold toxicity in my old school or
Hmm.
everyone's perfumes. And second of all, like you have so much more time to make your food. Like before, I would just be like throwing random things in my lunchbox, making it work because I was
Hmm.
short on time and didn't feel like packing my lunch the night before. I would just have like a sandwich with like deli meat or whatever. But being homeschooled, like I could actually make myself like an entire lunch or like an entire breakfast with like eggs and like I can make sourdough. Like I
Yeah.
don't know, it just gives you so much more time and it makes it so much more convenient and possible to like eat this way, which I love.
Yeah. And you know what? Until you mentioned that, I never thought about that, that I have that privilege of being able to make my lunch every day and not
Yeah.
have to like, well, not only because you can do it if you plan ahead, but I'm just not good at
Yeah,
planning ahead.
exactly.
So it's just a little bit harder, but it is kind of something I've taken for granted for, I don't know, 8 years that I've been homeschooling is that opportunity. And I never thought about how the system of that is, public school has affected majority of American children's diets. Like it in a very interesting, I think that would be an interesting thing to look at, like to study a little bit more.
Yeah, I know. Now that you bring that up, it is like crazy. I actually love this podcast called The Spillover,
Mm,
and they had someone on. It was months or maybe even a year ago. She like her children were going to a private school,
yeah,
and she like took over the cafeteria and she started like feeding everyone like roasted chicken, like pasture-raised chicken from local
yeah,
farms. And it was just like, oh my gosh, that's so amazing. Like I want to go to that school.
yeah.
And the kids like would go outside and they would go like fishing and they would get their own fish and cook it for lunch. Like it's so amazing.
Wow, that is
And like
so
that's like
awesome.
but like people like literally like, kids in public school are being fed food dye for lunch, like bleached flour, and then the teachers and parents are wondering why their kids are so hyper, like
Yeah.
after lunch or after eating or just in general, because their diets are just filled with all the stuff that's supposed to make them hyper.
I
That's a good
love the way
point.
that homeschooling fits into that kind of holistic lifestyle so well. Um, and you know
Mhm.
what? You brought up your podcast, so I think we have to touch upon that because you literally launched it today, which is just so awesome that
Yes, I did.
you're here on the podcast to talk about it. So, you mentioned the name, which you talked a little bit about the story behind it. So, what
Mhm.
do you hope to accomplish? Like, what is the mission of the podcast?
Yeah, so I plan on like I did a poll on my Instagram if like people wanted me to do mostly guests or mostly like solo episodes.
Hmm.
So I'm kind of gonna do a mixture of like solo episodes where I kind of like talk more about like my experience and like my opinion on subjects.
Yeah.
And then I also want to have like really cool guests on
Hmm.
to share their story, even share like their businesses on how they make like clean living more accessible and like tips they have for clean living and kind of just sharing their stories to like inspire people. Maybe I'll have to have you
Yeah.
on.
I would love to come and talk with you more.
Yes.
um, but you know what? I love that it's a teen's perspective because I do not see anything challenging teens to like eat better and just our way of living. I think that's such a great platform and such a great mission. So, and I know it's going to do well. I mean, like I said, me and Moana were talking about you earlier, and we're like, she needs to start a podcast because it's just
Thank
everyone loves
you.
your content so much, and so I think it's going to do great. And then what else?
Thanks.
Oh, you know what? You were doing a post recently about dealing with homeschool, but just hate comments in general, but specifically towards homeschoolers. So, how do you respond when people kind of are not that kind towards homeschooling and the idea of homeschooling?
Yeah, I usually don't because
Okay.
I
Yeah.
like usually don't really look at my comments anymore. Like when I first started getting them, like I wanted to see all of the comments and what everyone was saying about me. But now I just like I never really cared. I just it was more so like I wanted to see. But now I just kind of got sick of reading them because it's
Yeah.
all the
Yeah.
same things. Like if you get like it's all the same things. Like people are hating on homeschool, my diet, what I look like. Like it's all the same comments.
Hmm.
So or like it's just people responding to other people, so I'll have to like look back and read the whole thread. But
Mm.
I usually don't respond. And I actually made a video the other day about the homeschool haters because I feel like it is like we were saying earlier, homeschoolers are seen as like these socially awkward weirdos when in reality, people from public schools, not all people, but
Hmm.
a
Yeah.
lot of teenagers like can't even look anyone in the eye. They don't know what to do when they like go into a grocery store and see someone they know. They like put their head down, run away, hide because like they can't have a normal conversation with someone outside of school. It's like we were saying earlier, like they don't know how to interact in the real world. So I
Yeah.
just had to clap back, you know?
Yeah. Well, I like what you said about not really reading them because they have no, like, there's no reason why we should. And
Yeah.
I've gotten to that point now where I'm just like, you know what? Some people just do it to be like mean. They don't really even have a point to what they're saying. So
Yeah.
I like to answer the people who genuinely ask questions about homeschooling, even when they can come off a little bit offensive, because they really don't know. And I think that's
Mhm.
been majority of the time I get asked questions is it's genuine, like, I don't understand what homeschooling is, and that's what we're trying to fix. But sometimes
Yes.
people just do it to kind of just be mean. And you know what? Both it goes both ways because I've met homeschoolers who are awkward. Like they exist out there, definitely.
Yes.
The same way that they exist in public school. The main thing is, as teens, we need to be active, like you said, and we need to take ownership of our social lives outside of school. Like, it doesn't matter what method of schooling we're using. Like, that can't be the center of our lives because it won't be forever. And that's what will make and break your homeschooling experience. And I have to say that you're such a great communicator. And I love listening to homeschoolers who just have this way of communicating because it just immediately dissolves that stereotype. And just as a side note, how do you think like that you've learned to be such a great communicator? Is it just with all your Instagram reels you've been posting? Do you think that's been helping you?
Honestly, like my dad,
Okay,
he's
yeah.
super talkative and I think he's like very social and like great at getting his point across, and like
Mhm.
people always like want to talk to him.
Mhm.
So I would say it's like I wouldn't say like I wouldn't call myself like, oh my gosh, I'm such a good communicator, but I definitely learned I definitely learned a lot from my dad. And just like being on social media in general, like I have to engage with like a lot of brands and
Yes.
followers. So it's super like beneficial and impactful.
Mhm. It's a very good skill to learn because no matter what job you do, you'll always have to be communicating, which I
Yes.
love that. I think we should stress it more and I wouldn't have learned it had I not started this podcast. I feel like that's been such a big blessing. So I wanted to know if that was somehow to do with Instagram, like you feel like you've gotten better at it. But
Yeah, totally.
yeah, so that's a good thing for us to think about. Just how can we practice communication?
Hmm.
And even, in your job too, that's a great way. So yeah. All right. Well, you know what? Before we end, I always finish with asking you what is your best piece of advice for other homeschoolers?
Yeah, I would say like my biggest piece of advice for homeschoolers is to just stay consistent and on top of your
Hmm.
schoolwork because it's a huge responsibility and it's your responsibility. Like in public school, you have teachers to hold you accountable, and obviously you have your parents in homeschool, but it kind of more falls into your lap and in your hands
Yeah.
because it's like your education. It's just you and you're kind of in control of it. So it's easy to fall behind or like be unmotivated, but you really have to stay consistent because it really matters
Yes.
and it's an important thing. Like it's your education, and when it's your responsibility, like I understand, like it's easy to fall behind, but stay consistent. That's my biggest piece of advice.
Yes, that's definitely the one we need to hear the most because that is the hardest thing. One of the hardest things
Yes.
about being a homeschooler is self-motivation. So
Hmm.
keep the end in mind. And also, I think you have a very good understanding of how valuable education is. And I think learning that also is a very important part about staying consistent. It's a blessing to be able to learn.
Yes.
So, and it's such an opportunity. I mean, from your learning about, your body and your gut health and everything, you've been able to really change your life in a more positive way, which is just so powerful. So anyway, thank you so much for sharing your story on the podcast and for talking with us about homeschooling and clean living. And just for everyone listening, if there's someone who wants to follow you or listen to your podcast, how can they reach you?
Yeah. So my Instagram is Clean Living with Ava. I'm not on TikTok. My YouTube is also Clean Living with Ava, but I don't really post about like on that much. And my new podcast is called Becoming Basic. And right now it's only on Spotify, but I plan to get it on Apple Podcasts soon.
Awesome. Yep.
So make sure to check it out.
Yes, and for all of you listening, I will link all of that in the show notes, so you can definitely go follow her podcast to keep up with everything Ava is doing. So again, thank you so much, Ava, for your time, and I hope you continue doing everything you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me. I really loved talking with you about homeschool, and like I feel
Yeah.
like we have a lot in common. So it was great to chat.
Thank you all so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed hearing from Ava and you want to learn more, be sure to check out her podcast, Becoming Basic, on Spotify. I have a quick link in the show notes if you want to check that out right now. And then also go follow her on Instagram so you never miss another post that she makes or an update. She's constantly making more content. It is so fun. I highly encourage you to go follow her, especially if you're a homeschooler and you want to continuously be inspired. And remember that you're not alone in this journey. Be sure to go follow her. Next week, we will be talking with Mr. Steve Demi, the creator and founder of Matthew C. and Demi Learning. I know most of you probably have heard that. It is a very common homeschooling math curriculum, and I'm so excited for you to hear this episode. Mr. Demi shares so much advice, not only just on learning math, but also his own personal homeschooling journey and why he believes it is a wonderful form of education, and just some advice for you as you continue your journey to pursue a different education. So be sure to stay tuned for that. That will be coming out not next week, but the week after. I'm trying to do every other week just so I stay on top of my editing and I can still stay consistent without overwhelming myself. So this podcast is now officially bi-weekly until probably March. If I can stick with it, then maybe we'll go back to every week. We'll see how that goes. But so you can look forward to that at the end of January. So thank you again so much for listening. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or if you just want to share your story, be sure to email me. As always, I have my email in the show notes. Thank you again for listening. And as always, continue to be fearlessly different.